Hey, Raz, two people on the internet, they have a Bible and they told me that you're supposed to submit to me. Could you do that?
I think the dog speaks for me. No, fuck off.
Damn it. Paul and Morgan said that you're supposed to submit to me. They said the Bible said it. Hey, hun? I think that a couple of YouTubers said that you're supposed to submit to me. Is that a thing you could do?
That's nice, dear. Can you get me some drink?
No.
What's up, guys? Sorry for the constant sniffling, but it's gonna be one of those awkward episodes where I'm recording while sick. By the time you guys see the episode, I should be better, but anyways, I digress. First, we get the fan art, which is our one reprieve before we all get to collectively suffer. So, to begin with, a Furry Suris by Zapwolf, a Rule 63 Suris by Secret Heritage, and a Small Suris by Zach FR. As always, thank you all for your submissions. Anywho, let's roll the clips.
I've noticed kind of a trend of comments or a trend of worldviews of people saying like, I'm a Christian, and I just want you to know, guys, that God's intention is not that one of the parties would be a leader, it's equal leadership. God's not going to put the man as the leader and the wife as underneath that. Like, we've worked way too hard in culture and the feminist movement to take that big step backwards. We get that you're well-intentioned, but you can't just buy into what culture is shoving on you.
That's right, Paul. We get that you're well-intentioned, but you can't just buy into what your book is shoving onto you. Oh, wait, it doesn't work when we're talking about your thousands-of-year-old book? That's awkward. I could have sworn you wouldn't have resorted to special pleading already.
And that's where we're going to go to the Word and see that, whoa, like there are some specific things that the Lord has set up for a wife and for a husband, and they look different.
Yeah.
All the more reason to not take the Bible seriously as a moral arbiter. Keep it as a piece of classical literature. Learn some lessons from it. It does have some to give. Many of its stories have influenced modern stories for years. It is, at the end of the day, a good window into the past, and it is a good piece of classic literature. The problem, of course, being when you look at this piece of classic literature and attempt to use it to pilot your life going forward. And then it gets even worse when you try to use it to pilot other people's lives.
And we have a verse for that. Read the one from Genesis.
Genesis 3:16, so we're going way back to Genesis. Let's go with the New Living Translation. Then he said to the woman, this is God talking to the woman after she ate the fruit, Eve, I will sharpen the pain of your pregnancy, and in pain you will give birth, and you will desire to control your husband, but he will rule over you. English Standard Version, your desire shall be contrary to your husband. Then the NIV is a little different. It says your desire will be for your husband, but I think when you go into the commentary interpretation, it's saying a woman's desire is going to be...
It's like the husband's role, but God said, too bad the husband's gonna rule over you.
And doesn't that just make it sound worse? Like, let's ignore original sin for a second, because in the grand scheme of things, it shouldn't matter, because, well, at the end of the day, you didn't commit original sin. I think any moral structure that is based on being punished for the sins of your ancestors is automatically going to be viewed as horrible. We punish people for the things that they've done, not the things that other people have done. Just like I'm not responsible for anything that any of my friends have done. Though there do seem to be a few people who want to hold me accountable for those.
I'm not claiming, I did a little research into this, but I'm not claiming to really understand that totally. I actually prefer going to the New Testament and seeing where Paul is laying out the husband and wife roles. I think it's just to me, easier to be like, okay, this makes sense.
Yeah, but that showcases another huge issue with the Bible, doesn't it? More specifically, an issue with modern Christianity. Isn't it weird that most of the rules that are followed by Christians are actually proposed by Paul and not Jesus?
This seems a little like, here's your punishment. I do think with the coming of Jesus and Jesus being the perfect husband and then the church being the bride, he set up a beautiful model. And I do feel like going from this verse to where you have Paul talking about it after Jesus, some things perhaps shifted. So that's why I want to dive into these verses in the New Testament.
Well, it's interesting because I could see someone being like, see, if Eve hadn't bitten from the apple, they would have been equal, but I don't think that's what it is. I think that from the very beginning, God made man to lead the woman and God to lead the man. But but I think that like if Adam and Eve had not sinned, it wouldn't have been such a strife.
So what you're saying is, if Eve didn't bite from the apple, thus corrupting both her and Adam, it would have been easier for her to be a slave to Adam's whim? No, that doesn't sound right.
Interesting point. The tension would not have been what God is suddenly saying, like here, now there's going to be some tension.
Oh, nope, that's exactly what she's saying. Huh, that's a bit awkward. Just because you're brainwashed to enjoy servitude and being submissive doesn't mean it's a good thing. I'm not necessarily saying that she's brainwashed. Just saying that in general, just because you think that being submissive is a good thing, it doesn't automatically make it so. And I know that they're gonna hide behind the Bible and say that, aha, no, we're not saying that you have to do that. Our book is saying that. But at the end of the day, doesn't that just make it worse? Now we can't actually have an honest exchange of ideas because the exchange of ideas is gonna constantly have the Bible cockblocker in the middle. So remember that the next time that you want to have some sweet and sexy intellectual discourse, as long as it's consensual between the two debaters, don't let the Bible cockblock you. Just ignore it and continue on with your throbbing hard rhetoric.
There would be no desire in the woman to want to control,
Interesting.
because the world would be perfect.
Ah yes, a world where women and men are equal is not perfect. Only in a world where women are accepted to be less than and subservient will the world in fact be at peace. I'm starting to be really convinced that Morgan doesn't actually think about what she says, and instead just says the things that she thinks will make Paul happy.
You got an interesting point.
Yeah, and not to say that like if Adam and Eve hadn't sinned, like women just would cook food and sew clothes and like they'd be totally happy with that. Like I still believe that there would be women who would have leadership identities. Like I've said, I have a leadership complex or whatever. I still think that there would be that, but I think that it would be like the perfect balance of like husband, wife. She knows that she's a leader, but she has no problem submitting to her husband. I don't know. I just think things would be so much easier.
Or it's starting to sound like you actually don't know what you're talking about and you're making all of this up as you go. Nothing in that string of words you put together in a desperate attempt to make a statement held a coherent idea. It just held a bunch of I don't knows. Essentially saying, I don't know what it would have been like, but it would have been better. But if you don't know what it will be like, then you don't know that it will be better. Just a bunch of really self-contradictory statements there, Morgan.
Taking a bite of that fruit! Our culture, the world we live in, when we hear that we have to submit to someone, like it sounds terrible. It sounds horrible.
Hot take. That's because it is.
But it's like, I got to choose who I was going to submit to. So like, when I found Paul and we were dating and whatnot, like, and we were getting to know each other, I got to get to know him and decide, like, is this man going to be able to lead me?
That's not how this actually works. An action is not good or bad based on who's doing it. Now, I understand that in the BDSM community, there's a difference here. There actually is a method wherein one can submit to a dom and be part of a contractual obligation, but I know that's not what you're talking about, so before anybody starts well-actualing me in the comments, you're talking about something normative, something we should aspire to. Everyone should aspire to this leadership role idea, but I'm not the leader in my household. Nobody is the leader in my household. We have discussions over what does and doesn't happen in the house, and sometimes we butt heads over those discussions, but we still have them.
And I wanted a man who was going to be able to lead me, and so like, you know, just in the whole dating process, like we get to decide. It's not like all of a sudden a man is put over us and we have to submit to him no matter what.
And verses in the New Testament we're about to get into, like the husband has a role which is pretty crazy. It's like, husbands, love your wives and lay down your life for her like Christ did for the church. Like, that's a huge mantle for the husbands, laying down your life for your wife. So yeah, like Morgan's saying, wives, choose a man, and all men are going to be imperfect, but choose a man who's submitted before the Lord, submitted before the Word of God, and is going to embrace that calling.
So just because it sucks for the both of you, because you both get a raw end of the deal, one having to submit to the other and the other having to lay down their life for the other, that makes it okay? No, that just makes it suck for both of you. Wouldn't it be better to work towards a world where individual relationships that are held between unique individuals can have unique aspects about them that are pushed for and celebrated, as opposed to everybody else critiquing those relationships from the outside in and saying how they should or shouldn't operate?
When we were dating, like, we were asking really deep questions. We were talking to mentors and whatnot, and like the whole idea of Paul, like, you're gonna have to lay down your life came up. And you know, for me to be able to watch Paul and how he reacted to that, and like how he immediately got into the word and he sought out like wisdom of what that's gonna look like that was just a confirmation and comfort to me to know, like, this guy is going to do what his role is calling him to do, what God is calling him to do.
So, hot take, this sounds a lot less like you're actually trying to set up a stable and functional relationship, and more like you're trying to set up a stable and functional Dungeons & Dragons campaign. Whereas in a relationship, you should be looking for things like compatibility, whether or not you two will be able to provide for your household, provide for any potential children, and function as a cohesive unit. You instead seem to be setting up this weird, awkward, marriage-esque D&D campaign, wherein you're looking for those things, and also trying to make sure that when Morgan is playing Cleric, she's not going to use all of her spells for the day, casting Create or Destroy Water, so that when Paul, who I would imagine is a paladin in this situation, inevitably lays down his life and doesn't have the ability to heal himself, when Paul asks you whether or not you still have some spells available to use Cure Wounds on him, you won't just say, no, but here's some water that I created. You're trying to make sure that your Cleric is going to be able to heal the group instead of just giving you some fucking conjured water. And then you guys are going to start yelling at each other because Paul should have used Lay on Hands on himself a couple times instead of on the random NPC he was trying to proselytize to. So, again, am I the only one that thinks that this sounds more like trying to find somebody who's going to be able to be a good healer in a D&D campaign? Come on, Morgan, use your freaking cantrips. Paul doesn't have any. He's a paladin.
Obviously, when you get married, it's not perfect. Paul messes up, and I'm like, I don't want to submit to that, but like, I chose to marry him, and I'm called to submit to him. So just because he didn't fulfill his duty in that moment doesn't mean that I don't get to fulfill my duty in that moment.
So, you have to submit to him because you're married to him. So, let's say that he doesn't fulfill his role as the paladin. Let's say that he sells all the healing potions and romances the barmaid in that inn that you guys stopped in the other night, and then gambles all the money away. He didn't fulfill his role as a paladin, but now for some reason you still have to heal him? I know that in all seriousness, I should actually be talking about how if he turns out to be abusive or cheating or anything like that, you shouldn't have to submit to him, but honestly, I think I'm going to keep playing with the D&D roles thing.
Hearing you talk about that, practically, when you say that maybe Paul's doing something, he's making a mistake, he's dropping the ball, and I'm still called to submit, I definitely don't think it means that the woman, the wife, can't be like, husband, I feel like you're making a mistake here, or the decision that you're about to make is a mistake, here's my thoughts on it. And the husband should be able to hear that. The wife, voice your opinion, but it still shouldn't take away from the wife maintaining a posture of, husband, you're submitted before God, you're gonna have to give an account, and ultimately you're gonna make this decision.
That's right, Paul. Your cleric doesn't have enough spell slots to heal you all day. You're gonna have to give an account to your god, or you're gonna end up becoming an oath breaker. Why did you sell all the potions, Paul? You've got a gambling problem, Paul. You shouldn't be selling your potions so you can gamble. Oh god, I just realized that I've literally created an entire subgenre now of Paul and Morgan D&D, of Morgan, the starry-eyed cleric who has absolutely no business healing her paladin anymore, and of Paul, the oathbreaker paladin, wondering why he's having to fill out a new character sheet as a fighter when all he wanted to do was play die in the local bar. What a weird subworld I've created.
The whole idea of like, no, you should be equal. Like, well, in a way, it is kind of equal. Like, it is equally as hard to lead a marriage as it is equally as hard to submit to a marriage.
Yes, it is separate but equal. Think on that for a minute.
I think it makes sense. Different roles, but equally challenging, but equally gratifying.
Yeah.
Guys, when we're like walking in the way that God desires for us, the way God's designed for us, like it's fulfilling and it's nice. It's still gonna be challenging, but it's blessed by God.
Yes, but here's the thing. When I play D&D, I like to be able to make my own character. I like to be able to select my own role and talk with my friends over what role I would like to play. It's when those friends, or even worse, the dungeon master, Yahweh, tries to tell me what role I have to play that I start to hold issue. So Paul, please, stop letting God write your character sheet. He gave you an Oathbreaker paladin with no freaking charisma. Why? Why did he buy all of his points into intelligence? That's not your casting stat.
Oh, pretty clearly right there.
Now as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit in everything to their husbands.
Morgan, what do you think that means just practically? Because that's a little intimidating. Oh, you know, a single woman watching this, a newlywed wife that's like, we get it. Like, we get hearing that and being like, okay, submit in everything to my husband. Does that mean I just need to lay down and say, husband, make every decision. Husband, you have all of the leadership in every respect of our family dynamics.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's a pretty intimidating verse, and it sounds like if you were to read that and just that, it sounds like, wow, I literally can't do anything. I just have to ask my husband how to live my life.
Alright, so D&D jokes aside, this is where we actually have to look at what the biblical authors were trying to do and what was going on in 1st century Greco-Roman society. The household of the 1st century Greco-Roman world was incredibly hierarchical, with the adult male firmly entrenched at the top, but wife, children, and slaves would be entrenched below. Submission literally meant that a woman was expected to center her life around her husband, to avoid the assertion of her own desires and conform herself to her husband's will. 1st century authors for scripture literally meant submission. In fact, 1 Peter 3 commends Sarah, who treated Abraham as her lord and was obedient to him. Ephesians 5, of course, says that husbands are in a situation analogous to Christ, and wives are in a situation analogous to the church. Meaning that, yes, husbands were literally the leaders, and wives were literally supposed to take their word as law. This is how the 1st century authors of the Bible believed the hierarchy should be established. So before you try to twist it, soften it up, and act like you have your own meaning, let's not forget what the intent of the original authors would have been at the time it was penned. Historical context is always incredibly important when reading historical documents.
I don't think that's the case.
Proverbs 31 talks about this woman that's going out, doing her work.
Yeah, exactly.
She has these roles. She's an independent woman.
She's an entrepreneur.
Making business deals. So, like, obviously, it's not saying you just have to, you know.
Yeah, you can't just read this verse, okay? Like, we have to look at the whole Bible. We have to look at it in its context. We have to look at the next several verses that come along.
So, first of all, Proverbs is in the Old Testament. Proverbs was primarily authored by Solomon, but was also authored by others, and thus many of the books from Proverbs would be stemming from about the 10th century BC. This was during the time of Israel's United Kingdom. This means that an entirely different society was responsible for the writing of this text, versus the text that you're referencing from the New Testament, which was in the Greco-Roman society. So you're right, as I said earlier, you have to look at the historical context. But unfortunately for you, the historical context is working completely against you. When you look at the Bible as a whole, and you see the different dates, times, and regions that it was written in, you can see why there would be differences. The fact that there is a singular woman being an entrepreneur, if that is even an accurate assumption, in the book of Proverbs says nothing about what happens in the book of Ephesians. These are different authors, different societies, and completely different time periods. Think about how much culture has shifted and changed in the last 100 years alone. Now stretch that to 1,000 and you have the disparity that you're looking at here.
Going to.
Yeah.
But I think to start getting your heart ready, read this verse.
It'll just give you, like, reality check. God does desire for wives to submit. But now, what does that look like? So yeah, you can build off of that, but to ignore this verse is to ignore part of, you know, God's word, his instruction for us.
No, but what you're trying to do is harmonize these together to create a different narrative than was originally intended. It's literally the definition of misconstruing a passage. You're attempting to twist out a narrative that things aren't quite as bad as you describe in the Bible, but the problem is that the passages that you have to use to make that narrative in the Bible are completely disconnected from the passages that you first used. This is why Paul is an Oathbreaker paladin.
Yeah, I mean, like Paul just said, like, Proverbs 31 woman, she's singing
Impressive woman.
powerful, mighty woman. And it says, like, a woman like her is worth far more than rubies. So, like, we're not all of a sudden we get married and we can only cook and clean and that's all we do with our lives and we just say yes master to our husbands. But it is like this partnership, it is this understanding that when Jesus came, he gave us an image of what marriage looks like.
An image that includes Christ as the husband and the church as the wife, yes? In which case, no, you're wrong. Subservience is exactly what's taught. The church doesn't get to reason with Jesus. Jesus' word is law.
Like, because Jesus submitted to God, and the people that follow him submitted to him, and like, it was just this beautiful...
Yeah.
Ah, yes, unjustified hierarchy. There's nothing more beautiful. Screams in anti-capitalism.
Much of it starts with humility. A husband and a wife both humbling themselves before God. My life is no longer my own. God, you tell me what you want.
Being humble when you're coming into this topic is huge. Laying down your pride, laying down your offendedness, and just coming to the Lord and saying, God, what do you want my marriage to look like?
And that's why it's so hard for so many that suddenly hear, like, well, wives submit, husbands lead. Okay, like the pride wells up, and we've been so, you know, as the youth of our culture, we've been so saturated with pride being a good thing. Like, whoa, humility? Coming under something? Coming under God? Coming under my husband?
Phrasing!
No, I'm proud. You see pride everywhere, pride this, pride that, and it's like, well, actually, the better way that God's called us to live is humbling ourselves.
You know, I don't want to think that that was a subtle jab at gay pride, but I've seen Paul and Morgan's other videos, so I don't think I can actually grant that kind of charity. Anywho, if we were to look at pride through the lens of virtue ethics, pride can either be viewed as a vice, or it can be viewed as a virtue. This is because pride is predicated on the aspiration to live up to one's ideals. And if one's ideals include being able to independently structure your relationship, then yes, you could say that it's very prideful to want to set up your own roles in your relationship independently of what any god wants you to do. But I find it very hard to categorize that as a bad thing. In fact, to quote Aristotle, again, it is characteristic of the proud man not to aim at the things commonly held in honor, or the things in which others excel, to be sluggish and to hold back except where great honor or a great work is at stake, and to be a man of few deeds, but of great and notable ones. He must be open in his hate and in his love. For to conceal one's feelings, that is, to care less for truth than what other people will think, is a coward's part, and must speak and act openly. For he is free of speech because he is contemptuous, and he is given to telling truth, except when he speaks in irony to the vulgar. This passage gives a very different idea of what a proud person is. A proud person is not scoffy or haughty. No, in Aristotle's view, a proud person is someone who aims to do things that are truly great. Someone who isn't satisfied with the mundane. Someone who isn't satisfied with just doing the bare minimum. Someone who takes pride in their accomplishments. He also paints them as somebody who is willing to speak their mind, because the proud person would rather tell people around them the truth, elsewise be a coward. This is a rough but still very positive view of someone who is prideful. So again, sorry for reiterating, but I still find it hard to perceive pride as a purely negative thing. I know I went into virtue ethics in a previous video, but in short, virtue ethics is the idea that any virtue can be found between two vices. So I would posit that pride would actually be the virtue between humility and hubris. Hubris would take us to one extreme of being completely self-absorbed, and Christianity seems to want to take us to the other extreme of being fully humiliated, whereas the mean virtue between these seems to be pride.
So that's why I think it's valuable, one, to just approach any topic humbly, hearing, what people have to say on it, but then more than hearing what we have to say, going to the Word and studying it. In 2 Timothy, it says to study the Word so that you might show yourself approved. So
study the Word so much that you actually don't understand the historical context of the passages. Good job.
Really anxious to hear the second part of this, addressing husbands. Let's read that. So we're back in Ephesians 5, and now verse 25 says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, so that he might present the church to himself in splendor without spot or wrinkle. And then he goes on to say, in the same way, husbands should love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. Kind of like Morgan said, the roles are looking different, but the husbands are not, off the hook. They don't have this easy road when God's calling us to love your wives and lay down yourself for your wives.
No, but when you paint it that way, all you're really doing is showcasing how little you actually understand about the topic. Nobody is saying that husbands get off scot-free. They're saying that there's an imbalance of power. And there is an imbalance of power. Christ has power over the church. And analogously, husbands would have power over their wives. What we should strive for is where two people who are both human beings are seen as equal. Not separate but equal. Equal. You can do all the fancy dancing around you want, but you don't actually end up escaping the fact that the end result is not actually an equal partnership. It's a partnership that says equal with an asterisk at the end.
Yeah, guys, we get that there are men who take this and run with it, and they're gonna have to answer to God.
Yeah, guys, we get that there are people who are going to use this passage as an enabling passage for their own abuse, but that's okay because God will give them their comeuppance. Ultimate punitive action at the end of one's life makes everything they do beforehand justifiable, right? Except you wouldn't agree with that, but you're willing to say it as a special pleading case in this one interesting scenario.
I wouldn't want to answer to God and give an account to God for not loving my wife well and for abusing my leadership.
Yeah, I mean, the way that I interpreted some of that was that, literally at the end of Paul's life, when he goes up to heaven, God is going to call him forward and be like, how did you treat your wife? Did you love her well? Did you leave her spotless? Did you leave her holy?
Yeah.
And if he, was terrible to me and he used God's word as an excuse to do that.
If I was selfish and I was like, Morgan, I want this to be the way it is, without thinking of her and her wants and her needs, that's a terrible leader.
And God is going to get on him for that. So justice will be brought. But also, as far as the women, again, just because the husband isn't doing a super great job at times, I get it if the husband is just literally abusive and horrible, you need to get help and you need to bring people into your marriage and call him out and get that fixed. But in a, less extreme example, if Paul is just not being super great one day, or if every now and then he forgets to love me in the way that I need to be loved, that does not then give me an excuse to start being, disrespectful, to start being not submissive, whatever. I'm called to go to the Lord and pray, Father, please help my husband, wake up.
Well, I'm at least glad that you included that one caveat for abuse, though I will say that you should still be allowed to exit your relationship for any reason. It shouldn't be an escalation issue. You're your own autonomous person. If you decide one day that you just don't love Paul anymore, then you shouldn't feel compelled to stay in the relationship anymore. That's not healthy for either of you. Requiring something like constant abuse as an excuse to end a relationship is in fact a very effective way to enable that exact kind of abuse as people start resenting the relationship that they feel stuck and compelled to be in. But anyway, that's all that I've got time for today. We had some fun, we talked about D&D, and we got to look at some of the historical context behind different passages in the Bible. Yip yip hooray hooray. If you enjoyed the video, then please let me know in the comment section below. Elsewise, you can also leave a like, share it with your friends, drop it on social media, all that other fun stuff helps me out a ton. If you haven't subscribed already, then you've already seen the entire episode. You probably know if you want to or not. And if you are subscribed and haven't hit the notification bell, then that's maybe a thing you should do. It lets you know when videos come out on time, and if you see things within the first 24 hours, that helps me out in the algorithm greatly. Speaking of timing, if you guys want to see episodes before they come out, then the best way to do that is to check me out over on Patreon. Anywho, with all that said, I'll see you guys in the next one. Insert end of video tagline here.